In the velvet darkness of a Beverly Hills night, some secrets refuse to die. They linger like cheap perfume in an empty room, clinging to the fabric of history, waiting for a voice. For Marilyn Monroe, the world's most luminous and tragic star, her final secrets were not written in a diary or whispered to a lover. They were spooled onto magnetic tape, captured by a cold, impartial machine in a room that was supposed to be a sanctuary. This is the story of a ghost in the machine. The story of confessions made in the shadow of death, of words so dangerous, so raw, that they were condemned to silence. These were the final, desperate whispers of Norma Jeane, trapped inside the legend of Marilyn, speaking into the void from the plush leather couch of her psychoanalyst, Dr. Ralph Greenson. Tapes that held the key not only to her tormented mind, but to a conspiracy of power that may have sealed her fate. To understand the tapes, you must first understand the room. 444 North Bedford Drive, the office of Dr. Ralph Greenson, a man who moved among the Hollywood elite like a secular priest, hearing the confessions of the town's most fractured gods and goddesses. Frank Sinatra, Vivian Leigh, Tony Curtis, they all sought his counsel. But no patient would become more famous, more consuming, than Marilyn Monroe. By 1960, Marilyn was a paradox of unprecedented fame and profound isolation. The world saw the incandescent star, the breathless icon of desire. But behind the platinum hair and the billion-dollar smile was a woman teetering on the precipice. Her marriage to the intellectual titan Arthur Miller had crumbled into dust, a casualty of her insecurities and his disillusionment. Her reliance on barbiturates and champagne was no longer a secret, but a crutch she could not walk without. She was referred to Greenson in a state of crisis, a last-ditch effort to anchor her drifting soul. The sessions began as a professional arrangement, a space for her to excavate the traumas of her past. But in the claustrophobic world of Hollywood, where every relationship was transactional, the lines began to blur. Greenson became more than her doctor. He became her director, her confidant, her gatekeeper, and, some would say, her controller. His methods were unconventional. He sought to reparent the abandoned child within her, Norma Jeane. He integrated her into his own family life, inviting her for dinner, making her a fixture in his home. It was a radical, intimate form of therapy, a dangerous dance of transference and dependency. And at the heart of this volatile relationship was the tape recorder, a silent, whirring witness to every secret. Greenson recorded hours upon hours of their sessions. It was, he claimed, a therapeutic tool, a way for Marilyn to hear her own voice, to confront her own patterns of thought. But in doing so, he created a library of her soul, a raw, unfiltered archive of her deepest fears, her most scandalous liaisons, and her most painful memories. These were not the carefully curated anecdotes for the press. This was the unvarnished truth, spoken in a voice laced with sedatives and sorrows. For decades, the existence and content of these tapes have been the subject of feverish speculation, a holy grail for biographers and conspiracy theorists. The official record is a maze of contradictions. Greenson's family has fiercely guarded his legacy, denying the tapes held any explosive secrets. The law enforcement files are a mess of redacted reports and missing evidence. But the whispers have never stopped. Whispers from those who were there, from investigators who got too close, from insiders who heard the echoes of her final words. These whispers paint a portrait of a woman unraveling, and of confessions so potent they could topple the most powerful men in the world. They speak of a voice, fragile and trembling, recounting liaisons that went far beyond the gossip columns and into the corridors of power. This is where the story turns from tragedy to noir, from a case of personal demons to a saga of political conspiracy. The first secret, the one that hummed with the most dangerous electricity, was the Kennedy connection. The name that, according to multiple sources close to the investigation, was repeated over and over on those tapes, not just as a lover, but as a source of profound disillusionment and terror. The world knew of the flirtation, the breathless, infamous, "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" performance at Madison Square Garden in May of 1962. It was a public spectacle, a crystallization of glamour and power. But on the tapes, the story was allegedly much darker. The glitter was gone, replaced by the grim reality of a woman who felt she had been passed from one powerful brother to another, a beautiful object to be enjoyed and then discarded. The tapes were said to contain Marilyn's own account of her affair, not just with President John F. Kennedy, but with his brother, the Attorney General, Robert F. Kennedy.
Her voice, it is said, would shift from a wistful memory of romance to the sharp, bitter tone of a woman used. She spoke of promises made in hushed tones, of feeling like she was more than just a dalliance, that she was special to Jack. But as the president's political image became paramount, he grew distant. The phone calls became less frequent, then stopped altogether. He had moved on, leaving Marilyn in a precarious position, armed with secrets she was never meant to keep. It was then, the story goes, that Bobby was sent in. The loyal brother. The fixer. His initial purpose may have been to sever the ties, to manage the potential scandal, but their encounters reportedly evolved into an affair of their own, one far more intense and volatile. Marilyn, desperate for the love and stability she never had, allegedly latched onto Bobby, believing he might be the one to save her, perhaps even marry her. On the tapes, she allegedly confessed her growing obsession and her subsequent panic. She spoke of a little red book, a diary, where she chronicled the intimate details of her time with the Kennedys. Pillow talk. Political secrets she'd overheard. Things an attorney general and a president would never want made public, especially not from the mouth of the world's most famous movie star. According to those who claimed to know the contents of the recordings, her tone on the tapes became increasingly desperate in her final weeks. She was no longer just a spurned lover. She was a threat. She told Greenson she felt like she was being watched. Her home, the only place she felt safe, now felt like a cage. She spoke of her phone line clicking with strange noises, of men in sedans parked on her quiet Brentwood street. The paranoia was setting in. But was it paranoia if it was true? This was the height of the Cold War. The Kennedys were battling organized crime figures like Sam Giancana, a man Marilyn also knew through her friendship with Frank Sinatra. She was the nexus, the single, fragile point where the glamour of Hollywood, the power of Washington, and the corruption of the mob all converged. The tapes, it is claimed, were her evidence, her leverage. In one of her final sessions, she allegedly told Greenson about a press conference she planned to hold. She was going to tell the world everything, not out of malice perhaps, but out of a desperate, primal need to be heard, to prove she wasn't just a fantasy to be thrown away. She was real. And the consequences of her relationships were real. This was the bombshell Greenson was sitting on. The recorded confession of a woman threatening to ignite a scandal that could destroy the Kennedy administration. It was a secret too big for his Beverly Hills office, a truth too dangerous to exist. The ghost in the machine wasn't just speaking of heartbreak. It was speaking of treasonous indiscretions and political dynamite. But the Kennedys were only one chapter in the litany of confessions. The tapes also allegedly held her raw, unfiltered feelings about the very system that had created her. Hollywood, the dream factory that manufactured the goddess but was crushing the woman. For years, Marilyn had fought to be seen as more than a body, more than a punchline in a blonde wig. She had founded her own production company, a bold and unprecedented move for a female star in the 1950s. She had studied at the Actors Studio in New York, desperate to be taken seriously as a dramatic actress, to shed the skin of the ditzy characters that had made her famous but left her feeling empty. On the tapes, she supposedly raged against the studio moguls who saw her as a commodity, a beautiful, blonde cash cow to be milked for every last drop. She spoke of the casting couch culture, the casual degradation, the constant pressure to maintain an impossible ideal of perfection. She confessed to Greenson the terror she felt every time she had to step onto a set, the crippling stage fright that was dismissed by directors as unprofessionalism and diva-like behavior. She called the persona of Marilyn Monroe her greatest creation, but also her prison, a mask she had to wear that was slowly suffocating Norma Jeane. On the tapes, her voice would reportedly crack as she described the profound loneliness of being in a room full of people who were all in love with someone who didn't really exist. They didn't want her. They wanted the fantasy. This struggle came to a head in the final months of her life, during the ill-fated production of Something's Got to Give. The tapes were said to be filled with her anguish over this film. She was frequently ill, suffering from sinusitis and her chronic endometriosis. But the studio, 20th Century Fox, showed little sympathy. They saw only delays and mounting costs. She confessed her fury and humiliation to Greenson. They were using her illnesses as an excuse, she claimed, a way to punish her for her power, for her salary, for her defiance. In June 1962, the studio fired her, The headlines were brutal, painting her as an unreliable, washed-up star. It was a public execution, a devastating blow to a woman whose entire sense of self-worth was tied to her work and the love of her audience. According to the legend of the tapes, she told Greenson that the firing was a conspiracy, that other forces were at play, perhaps political ones, pulling strings to discredit her at the very moment she was becoming a liability to the Kennedys. She was being systematically erased, professionally and personally. Her voice on the recordings was allegedly a torrent of fear, anger, and betrayal. She was fighting back, trying to regain control. She posed for a series of stunningly intimate photographs for magazines like Life and Vogue, attempting to reshape her own narrative, to show the world she was still vital, still beautiful, still Marilyn. But it was a battle she was fighting on too many fronts. The studio was against her, the political machine was turning on her, and worst of all, her own mind was a battlefield. Because the third, and perhaps most haunting secret on those tapes, was the one that had been there all along. The ghost that had haunted her since birth. The tapes were a direct line into the terrified heart of a little girl named Norma Jeane Mortensen. A girl who was born into a world without safety nets. With Greenson, Marilyn relentlessly excavated the ruins of her childhood. A past she had tried to paper over with glamour and fame, but which festered beneath the surface. On the tapes, she allegedly spoke in a child's voice at times, recounting the fragmented, nightmarish memories of a life spent in flux. She spoke of her mother, Gladys, a woman with beautiful, faraway eyes who wrestled with mental illness and was ultimately institutionalized when Norma Jeane was just a child. She recounted the endless parade of foster homes and a grim stay in a Los Angeles orphanage. She spoke of the profound feeling of being unwanted, unloved, a piece of luggage passed from one reluctant family to another. These were the foundational wounds that shaped the woman she would become. Her desperate, insatiable need for love and approval, her terror of abandonment. Her voice on the tapes, as reported by those who claimed to have knowledge of them, was a map of her psychological scars. She confessed her deep-seated belief that she was unworthy, that anyone who got close to her would eventually leave her. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy that played out in her marriages. Joe DiMaggio, the stoic baseball hero, couldn't handle her fame. Arthur Miller, the intellectual playwright, couldn't handle her demons. She allegedly told Greenson that every man she ever loved was a stand-in for the father she never knew. Her birth certificate listed her father as Martin Mortensen, but her mother's husband had left before she was born. Gladys later showed her a photograph of a man with a thin mustache and a fedora, a man named Charles Stanley Gifford, and told her this was her real father. Marilyn's obsession with finding and connecting with this phantom father was a recurring theme on the tapes. She had tried to contact him, but he had refused to see her. This rejection, this confirmation of her deepest fear, that she was fundamentally unwanted by the man who gave her life, was a wound that never closed. It drove her search for powerful, older men to protect her. It was a void that no amount of fame, money, or adoration from strangers could ever fill. And so, she had latched onto Greenson. In the twisted logic of her trauma, he had become the ultimate father figure, the one who was paid not to leave. Her dependency on him was total. She called him dozens of times a day. She couldn't make a decision without his approval. And he, in turn, was caught in the web. Was he helping her? Or was he enabling her, fostering a dependency that was ultimately fatal? This was the trifecta of secrets captured on tape. A dangerous political conspiracy, a bitter indictment of the Hollywood machine, and a heartbreaking confession of a lifetime of trauma. A perfect storm of vulnerability, power, and despair, all converging in that small, soundproofed room on Bedford Drive. And then, on the night of August 4th, 1962, the voice was silenced forever. The official story was probable suicide. A lonely, depressed movie star who had taken too many pills. But in the chaotic hours and days that followed her death, another story began to emerge. A story of chaos, cover-ups, and missing evidence. At the center of it all were Dr. Greenson's tapes. What happened to those hours of recorded confessions? The answer is a vortex of conspiracy. Sergeant Jack Clemens, one of the first LAPD officers to arrive at the scene of her death, always maintained that the scene felt staged, that something was deeply wrong. He saw Marilyn's housekeeper, Eunice Murray, washing sheets in the middle of the night. He saw Dr. Greenson, who seemed to be orchestrating the scene. In the aftermath,
Accounts diverge wildly. Some claim that Dr. Greenson himself took the tapes from his office that very night, realizing the cataclysmic material they contained. His loyalty, in the end, may have been to the powerful, not to the patient who had entrusted him with her soul. Others believe agents, sent by the Kennedys, retrieved the tapes, part of a systematic scrubbing of any connection between the president, his brother, and the dead movie star.
Private investigator Fred Otash, a notorious Hollywood fixer, claimed for years that he had bugged Marilyn's home and had his own tapes. Tapes that allegedly captured a violent argument between Marilyn and Bobby Kennedy on the very day she died. Tapes that also, conveniently, disappeared. The official investigation was a farce. Key witnesses were not properly interviewed. The timeline of the night shifted constantly. Marilyn's own phone records for the hours leading up to her death vanished from the phone company's archives. The coroner who performed the autopsy, Dr. Thomas Noguchi, would later write that he was never satisfied with the suicide ruling, that many questions remained unanswered.
And what of the Greenson tapes? The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office launched a threshold investigation in 1982 to re-examine the case. They requested Greenson's files.
His widow, Hildy, refused, citing patient confidentiality. A legal battle ensued. In the end, the DA's office was given access only to redacted, written transcripts, not the audio tapes themselves, and those transcripts, they concluded, contained nothing to warrant reopening the case.
But the question remains, were those the complete transcripts? Were the most damning sessions, the ones about the Kennedys and the planned press conference, ever transcribed at all? Or were the tapes themselves long gone by then, destroyed in a fireplace or buried deep in a government vault, their secrets silenced forever? The ghost in the machine had been exorcised. We are left with a profound and haunting silence. A silence where a voice should be. The tapes, real or rumored, have become a symbol of Marilyn's ultimate tragedy. Her entire life was a desperate search to be heard, to be understood for who she was behind the facade. In her final days, she poured her entire truth into a machine, her last will and testament spoken onto magnetic tape.
And in the end, even that was taken from her.
The world was not ready for her truth in 1962. Perhaps it still isn't. It was easier to accept the simple, sad story of the broken starlet than to confront the complex, dangerous reality of a woman who knew too much. It was easier to blame her demons than to question the powerful men who may have helped create them, and then destroyed her to protect themselves.
The ghost in the machine may be silent,
but it has never truly gone away. It lingers in the inconsistencies of the official reports, in the nervous glances of history, in the enduring enigma of her final, lonely night. It reminds us that the brightest stars can be consumed by the darkness they illuminate, and that the most dangerous secrets are the ones a global icon whispers just before she fades to black.
The story of Marilyn Monroe is a labyrinth of shadows and light, and many of its darkest corridors remain unexplored. If you wish to journey deeper into the mysteries of her life and the legends she left behind, subscribe to Boulevard of Monroe. The Boulevard is waiting.